broadly speaking, you support what we're trying to bring about here, because we've only got until May, it is thought. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. I was struck by this protest, but more than that, during the very, very prolonged Extinction Rebellion takeovers of the streets around central London, and a quite deliberate determination to take over more and more streets and stop people getting to work, which, okay, you can understand is a protest, but it went on for day after day after day. I was struck by how many people wrote to me. I'm sure I wasn't alone, many of them who were self-employed, whose livelihoods collapsed as a result of that. They simply couldn't get to the places they needed to, and they aren't protected in many cases as employees of big companies might be. So they were damaged, and so I was struck that they all complained that it's all very well and good for people, many of them outside of London, to come and stop them getting to work. But it becomes more than a protest once it becomes a day upon day upon day affair, and the police should have powers to move people on and to make sure that this doesn't end up blocking the arteries in London. But at the same time, somebody suggested to me that maybe people like me should be able to sue those who go beyond a certain limit and actually try and get some of my livelihood back.
Tell me how that works in practical terms, Iain.
Well, I haven't looked at this before. It was just comments made to me by those, particularly, as I say, those who were self-employed, who ended up having to change their jobs and cancel appointments that, of course, meant lost livelihood, in a sense that people who knowingly set out to stop them being able to get to work for whatever purpose it is over a prolonged period of time, then maybe there is some merit in saying, well, they open themselves to later prosecutions. Of course, protest is important. It's part of a democratic society.
Yes.
It's important that you're able to make your point. But, some people, a lot of my not just my constituents, but people around the country, said to me it went beyond that. And what it became eventually was a kind of affair to try and say, we're going to stop you no matter what because we think you're wrong. And that becomes more than a protest.
And lastly, you may be aware the police tried to implement Section 14 of the 1986 Public Order Act last year, which allows them to designate a certain area for demonstrations. So for the purpose of debate, you can do what you like in Trafalgar Square, but you can't stop the roads around, allowing your constituents, my listeners, to go about their daily business and earn their living. And that was subsequently overturned because it breached the protesters' human rights. This is the other thing we're going to have to work our way through. Some people's human rights, but the human rights of your constituents to do a day's work.
Yeah, there was a real issue, I think, in all of that. I think it's quite reasonable, as I say. I'm absolutely in favour of the ability to protest, quite right. And there are times when certain streets will be closed off because people are protesting, marching or whatever. What was different about this was that it ended up being a very long period where whole streets, whole areas, basically just had people sitting on them and not moving. And that meant very great difficulty for people trying to ply their business. They don't mind, the odd day or whatever, but putting people into an area and letting them protest there seemed to be wholly reasonable at the time. And it's a matter the government, I know, wants to look at as to whether or not we should have powers and whether we should do something about legislating now that we're leaving the European Union.
So lastly, correctly drafted laws that absolutely protect the right of people to protest, but start to take action on the ability to people to go about their work, you would be in support.
Yeah, yes, I am. I think we do need to look at this. What these protests exposed was not the ability to protest, but what became seen by a number of the people that wrote to me as kind of almost vindictive. That if you had a business to run or whatever, you were seen as part of the problem, not part of the solution, and therefore they didn't seem to care a damn whether or not you got to work, whether your livelihood collapsed or whatever. And as I say, the number of people that wrote to me, I was quite surprised by how many said, well, my sympathies are we need to get our climate change sorted out and everything else and take the right ways of helping reduce our carbon, but stopping me getting to work for over a prolonged period and making my life miserable doesn't actually make me in any way a supporter of this. It actually takes me in the opposite direction.